It's time for another Marvel Snap over-the-air update, and we've got some absolute bangers this week. Before we jump into it, though, I'd like to highlight something that the Marvel Snap team tells us in their opening paragraph this week. They comment that Loki decks have sent the metagame spinning. They are actually one of the most popular archetypes in the history of the game. However, the performance of these decks overall has not been hyper concerning because the metagame rapidly shifted to favor linear strategies that was able to combat these decks. As someone who spent the better part of the last week and a half or so since Loki released, kind of defending the card and saying that it doesn't seem busted and it seems quite reasonable and the metagame can adapt and adjust, it's awesome to see Second Dinner communicate to us that this is in fact what happened based on the metrics on their back end. It's also not surprising to me that Loki is one of the most popular decks at its inception in the history of the game, because Loki's honestly one of the most fun new cards to come to Marvel Snap, in my very subjective opinion, in a very long time or potentially ever. That being said, there is a small adjustment coming to the Loki deck, jumping into our first change in the over-there update today. The Collector is being changed from a 2/2 down to a 2/0, still getting that +1 power whenever a card enters your hand from anywhere other than your deck. I think this change makes a lot of sense. I don't think any deck that's currently playing the Collector is going to suddenly stop playing the Collector with this change. Also, it's noteworthy that the change that they made to Snowguard in the patch last Tuesday basically made it so most Collector decks are going to all play Snowguard now and passively get it +2 from this one energy card generating 2 cards in your hand, meaning this change is kind of just taking Collector and dragging it back to where it was before Snowguard was buffed, meaning that overall it's still a pretty fine card that's probably going to regularly crack double digits, especially inside of these Loki decks. The change to the Collector's power isn't the only change to the Collector specifically and these Loki decks, however, because the next change in this over there update is a massive one, and that is the Shadow King is changing from a 3/3 down to a 2/3. A tech card of this power level costing just 2 energy is huge. Second Dinner notes that Shuri and the Collector have been good news for Shadow King, and it's already been seeing some amount of play, but they want to see what this card is able to do when it's not limited to just other strategies that can synergize with it. Specifically, they've been seeing it see a lot of play inside of Cerebro 3 decks as well as Silver Surfer decks with its 3 cost, and they think that by reducing its cost from 3 down to 2, it can see play in a wider range of shells, and they go on to note as well that they think making Shadow King such an efficient threat in terms of how much energy it costs will also allow it to compete more eloquently in the tech card slot against other cards like Shang-Chi, overall diversifying the tech cards that people are playing in the metagame in general. I think overall this is an awesome change. I'm glad to see them push in this direction, letting us diversify which cards we want to consider when we're playing and picking out our tech slots. I'm interested to see how exactly this one works out in the metagame. Our next over-the-air update is a small one. Lady Sif is going from a 3/4 up to a 3/5 while still discarding the highest cost card from your hand. Second Dinner notes that Lady Sif has always been kind of solid and had a home in specific decks, things playing Apocalypse and Hela and Agatha. That being said, her individual performance hasn't been stellar, and while they don't think that this one additional point of power is going to necessarily make her an all-star, it's definitely not going to make her worse than she was before. And I think these types of small changes are kind of free rolls that I like to see inside of these OTA updates. You take a card that's underperforming or not quite up to stuff, and you give it one extra point, and you see where things shake out after a little bit. Speaking of things that are awesome to see in these over-the-air updates, we see SpiderHam going from a 2-2 down to a 1-1. This is the original stat line that SpiderHam was released at, but remember, as of last Tuesday's patch, SpiderHam's text is on reveal, transform the leftmost card in your opponent's hand into a pig, keeping its power and cost. Second Dinner notes that they expected there to likely be a chance that this was a change they were going to have to make when they adjusted SpiderHam's text box. However, they wanted to see how it would play out in the short term, and since they knew they had another over-the-air update coming out shortly, they wanted to see what that new text box did as a 2-2, and obviously it meant the card wasn't seeing enough play and wasn't powerful enough, so they're making it more powerful in this over-the-air update by dropping it back down to that original 1-1 stat line. Looking forward to the future, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if we see at least a small or other change to SpiderHam come as well, because on the horizon, we have Mobius and Mobius releasing at the end of the month, and his interaction with SpiderHam's pig is actually quite awkward. If you SpiderHam your opponent and they have a Mobius and Mobius in play, the pig actually becomes completely free because the base cost of the pig is currently 0 and it gets increase to whatever the cost of the card was. I think we probably need to see the pig's base cost get adjusted to like 5, 6, 7, something that just doesn't get impacted by other things in the game, but also doesn't let the pig be free under Mobius, because I think even if this pig buff puts SpiderHam back on the map as a meaningful card, once Mobius releases, it's just going to disappear again because of this downside that's going to happen. Our fourth and final buff in this week's over-there update is Black Cat, moving from a 3-7 up to a 4-9. Second Dinner notes that Black Cat has been one of the weaker performing cards in Marvel Snap for a long time now, and they're not certain that this change is necessarily going to change that dynamic, but they feel confident that it's going to make her better than she was before. Most notably, this change does make it a little bit harder to play Black Cat out, because if you draw her on the third turn now, she is going to discard at the end of that turn. But that being said, most of the decks that are looking to leverage Black Cat are playing her with things like Hela or Ghost Rider, meaning her ending up in the discard pile is ultimately the goal. Personally, I think this change looks pretty sweet. It means that if you have Black Cat with Ghost Rider together, you get 12 points of stats for just 4 energy without needing an additional enabler for your Ghost Rider. Perhaps this Black Cat change in combination with the recent Blade change that made Blade more consistent, discarding the rightmost card in your hand, could put some real Ghost Rider decks on the map. At a minimum, I agree with Second Dinner's assessment that this change is definitely a strict upgrade to what Black Cat was bringing to the table before, and I'm looking forward to trying her out to see if it can potentially be competitive now. As always, I would love to know what you think of our 1 nerf and 4 buffs that we have in today's over-the-air update. Overall, I think I'm pretty happy with what's going on. I love that we see Second Dinner continuing to iterate on these different card designs, trying to get them really right. Things like Shadow King and SpiderHam that have been adjusted more than one time at this point really show that Second Dinner is not just a set it and forget it with cards in this game. They want to get these cards to points where they are fun and reasonable to play with, but also powerful without being completely overbearing. Personally, I think the new Shadow King in more fair decks like Darkhawk, as well as Black Cat inside of things with Ghost Rider, are the things that I'm most looking forward to brewing with on stream here this week. I would love to know what you're going to play with. As always, if you enjoyed my musings on this topic, snap that like button. Have fun, folks.